this again is one of those gospel lessons similar to one we may have heard a few weeks ago, where your first reaction might be, that ain't fair. And if it is, I would simply say to you, maybe, just maybe, you are hearing these words and responding to them from the value of the world. For in fact, by everyday standards, by the way the world does things, it ain't fair. Nobody did anything wrong, or so it seems. Especially that last slave, the last servant, because he didn't go out and squander or use or lose the money. He returned what was there. But you see, this isn't about the things of this world. Jesus is teaching directly. He says, the kingdom of God will be like. So he's not teaching us about what's fair and not fair in our tradings with one another. That's not what this is about at all. But rather, this is about the kingdom of God and our role in it. That's where we have to focus. Because you see, in the story, if you recall the words very quickly, one person was given 5 talents, another 2, and another 1. You see, the word talent, as it is used in the gospel for us, in our understanding, is sort of a double entendre, sort of 2 different meanings here. You need to understand that in the time of Jesus, this was a measure of money. And in fact, it was a lot of money. It wasn't just a few dollars here or there. It's more, like months and months worth of salary, that kind of thing. So this is high finance in a lot of ways. But Jesus is telling a story of a very rich individual. In some translations, he's called a king. And he's parceling out some of his wealth to slaves, to servants, so that when he returns, this money would not have lain fallow. In other words, it would have done something. It would have grown. We call that investing. Now, with that in mind then, we can also think a little bit about the way that we use the word talent, because it's very similar. You see, God gives us various gifts. He gives us financial resources, to be sure. But he also gives us spiritual resources, spiritual gifts. And like in the story, no 2 people have the same things, have the same amounts. Some people might be seen to have much more than others. And so the story isn't about the numbers. This isn't a numbers game, an accounting drill. This is about how you use that with which you have been entrusted. In other words, in a word, this is about stewardship. Stewardship in the broadest sense of the term. About who we are as disciples of Christ and how we use all of the gifts that come to us as we acknowledge God being the author of all things. That's the first term of our creed, if you recall, when you say it in a few moments, that God is the source of all things, visible and invisible. And so that's how we interpret the word talent for ourselves today. Visible, the things of this world, but also invisible. The spiritual gifts, the skills, the talents in the modern sense of the term that God has given us each. We can look around the room and we can say, well, I'm not talented like that person or this person in that particular field or that. They may have more knowledge about something or more expertise about something than I do, but that's worried about comparisons. And really, this story isn't about comparisons at all. Because one of the things we don't think is really fair, in some ways, perhaps, is the fact that the man with 5 talents got a certain reward. But the thing in the story is the man with only 2 talents, the words are exactly the same. So his reward is exactly the same. So it's not about how much you can produce, but the fact that these 2 servants used what they were given and multiplied. It happens to be by a factor of 2 if you just can't resist doing the numbers. But the only comparison that Jesus makes is not among the 2 that were given the talent and produced something for, but with the one who was entrusted with but 1 talent. You see, because that person refused to take a risk. That person took the safe way. And you know what? That's a great temptation for us, isn't it? To take the safe route, not to take risks, especially when it comes to our faith. What Jesus is trying to get across to us is that in reality, it is not enough for us simply to get by, simply to do that which is required. In other words, not to simply not do bad things, to check off the boxes, to do the minimal kind of thing. No. Jesus is trying to teach us that the purposes of God are in such a way that whatever we are given is given to us not simply to be hoarded and kept aside and kept pristine so we can take it out later and give it back, but that whatever we are given, regardless of how much or how little it may be, is given to us for God's purposes, to use for the sake of the kingdom of God, to allow the kingdom of God to grow and to flourish. This is not a gospel about survival. It is a gospel that says, where God is, there is life. Where God is, the kingdom will grow. It is only we who can stop it. And we stop it when we receive all of these wonderful things from God. We take them and we keep them secure. We conserve them. We make sure nothing changes. We keep doing the same old, because it worked in the past. When we are afraid to step out and take risks for the sake of the kingdom of God. That's a hard teaching, because clearly what happens in this gospel lesson is that latter choice is not only not the best choice. In Jesus' thinking, it is unacceptable. Unacceptable. And so it is that if our disposition is such that we want to simply take what God has given us and put it aside and keep it well polished and manicured and just let it sit there until the accounting comes and we can, with some pride, say, look, I didn't do anything bad. Jesus says, this is not an acceptable option. The kingdom of God is not about keeping things as they are. The kingdom of God is about transforming and changing the world. Because the world is not what it ought to be. And in fact, Jesus came to proclaim the kingdom, to change and transform this world so that it is more in line with what God had in mind from the first moment of creation. That responsibility has been to us. The Master, the Creator, has entrusted to us the work of the kingdom of God. It isn't enough to simply receive the grace of God, to receive God's forgiveness and God's largesse, to receive what God seems to have given us and just let it sit there. It is imperative. It is commanded, in a sense, that we take what God has given us and put it to good use, so that when we are called to an account, we will be able to say, I took what you gave me and I have doubled it. I have done the work of the kingdom. God will not be satisfied in this story with simply saying, thank you. I took what you gave me, and now I give it back to you unharmed, unblemished, exactly as you gave. Not enough. God calls us forth to go out into the world and to take what we hear in His Word, to take what we have received in His forgiveness, to take what we have received in the many grace and bountiful gifts that God has given us, both in terms of this world and of the spirits, and use every bit of it to make the world different, to change the world, to see that the world is a more just and real place, that it aligns with the mind and the heart of Christ. That's what it means to be a disciple. That's what it means to be a good and faithful steward. That's a line we often use, particularly at funerals, when we say our last goodbye. I usually place my hand near the remains of the one we bid farewell. Go now, good and faithful servant. It comes from this story. The good and faithful steward, the good and faithful servant, is the one who takes what they are given and multiplies it for the sake of the kingdom of God. This cannot be done without risk. We must be willing to risk ourselves for the sake of the kingdom of God. Whether it is with our financial resources, or if it is with the spirit that is within our heart, using the talents, the gifts, the good things that God has entrusted to us. For as we will say in a moment or two, all things come of thee, O God, and of thine own have we given thee. This is the meaning. Let God's grace come upon you this day and give you the courage that is part of the gift of the Spirit itself. The courage to risk for the sake of the kingdom, to risk going out and telling people good news, the risk of going out and seeking to bring peace and reconciliation to people around you, the risk of going out and being citizens not of this world, but of that kingdom that knows no end. Brothers and sisters, we reach the end of our time in this year. Soon we'll turn our attention to other things, holidays with Christmas and all. But always remember this story, so that whatever is given and we receive belongs not to us but to God. It is merely entrusted to us, even our daily breath, entrusted to us that we might return to God 2, 5, and 10-fold. That is our task. That is our charge. God will give us everything we need to answer it. Will you?